The hall was glowing with lights that made the chandeliers sparkle like tiny stars. The walls were decorated with soft flowers and ribbons, and the tables were filled with shining glasses, neatly folded napkins, and plates of delicious food. Everyone looked happy, talking in small groups and laughing. The air smelled sweet, with hints of fresh flowers and the warm aroma of the buffet. Guests were dressed in their best, with shiny shoes and sparkling jewelry, and some children were running quietly between the tables, their excitement barely contained. The mood was lively, but there was also a feeling of anticipation because everyone knew that today was a very special day. In the middle of all this celebration, a young woman moved quietly between the tables. She wore a simple uniform, her hair tied back neatly, and a small smile on her face. She carried trays of drinks and plates with desserts, making sure that everyone had what they needed. No one really noticed her at first, because she was polite and careful not to disturb the guests. She had worked at this hall for a long time and knew how to move quickly without drawing attention. Her steps were soft, almost like she was gliding across the floor, making sure she didn't bump into anyone or spill anything. Even though she looked like any other server, there was something different about her. She had a calm and quiet presence, like someone who carried a world of thoughts inside. Her eyes would sometimes drift toward the corner of the hall where an old, grand piano stood. The piano was polished and shiny, and its black and white keys seemed to invite someone to play them. The young woman's fingers would twitch slightly whenever she looked at it, almost as if she could hear music in her mind. She had played that piano before many times, but she never told anyone. To the guests, she was just the polite server moving between the tables, but she carried a secret talent that could astonish everyone. Guests were enjoying themselves, sipping wine and soft drinks, chatting about the ceremony and how beautiful everything looked. Some were taking pictures, while others were telling stories about past weddings they had attended. There was laughter from a group of friends talking about funny moments, and a couple of older guests were quietly smiling at the happiness around them. The young woman moved among them all, offering drinks and desserts, making sure everyone felt taken care of. She never interrupted conversations, never made a mistake, and always seemed to know exactly what someone wanted before they even asked. Near the back of the hall, a small group of people gathered around the piano. They were curious about the instrument, admiring its shine and imagining what it might sound like. One of them jokingly asked the young woman if she could play, expecting a polite refusal or a shy smile. She paused for a moment, her heart beating a little faster. She had never played in front of a crowd like this, especially not at a wedding. But something inside her told her it was okay. She nodded gently, almost shyly, and began to walk toward the piano. Guests noticed her moving to the piano and some began to laugh quietly, thinking it would be a fun little moment. They didn't know her story, didn't know that she had spent years learning music in secret, practicing late at night when no one could hear. She had learned to play complex pieces by ear, and could create beautiful melodies that touched people's hearts. But here, at this wedding, she was just a server. No one had any idea what she was capable of. As she reached the piano, she sat down on the bench and placed her hands on the keys. Her fingers hovered for a moment, almost like they were remembering something. She took a deep breath, feeling the cool touch of the keys beneath her palms. Guests around her started whispering, curious and amused, not knowing what to expect. Children stopped running and stared, and even the adults leaned slightly forward, sensing that something different was about to happen. The young woman closed her eyes for a second, letting her mind focus on the music she had imagined, and then she pressed a single key. The sound was soft but clear, filling the corner of the hall. It was only one note, but it was enough to make people look up and notice. She pressed another, then another, and soon a simple melody began to flow from her fingers. It was gentle at first, like a breeze passing through the room. Guests looked around at each other, surprised that someone who had seemed so quiet and ordinary could make the piano sing. There was a hush settling over the group, not because they were scared, but because they were curious and captivated. The young woman's presence at the piano had changed the energy in the room, turning playful laughter into quiet attention. While she played, her expression was calm, but inside, She felt a mixture of nerves and excitement. She had done this many times alone in her room, but never in front of people. Now, the sound she created was reaching the ears of dozens of people, and they were listening intently. Some guests whispered to their friends, asking if she had studied music somewhere, while others simply sat and watched, unable to speak. Even the children stayed near the tables, mesmerized by the gentle flow of notes. The young woman didn't need to see their faces. She could feel their attention, their curiosity, and their growing amazement. She continued playing, letting the melody grow slowly. It was not a rushed or complicated tune at first, but it had a rhythm and beauty that made people pause. Guests started to put down their drinks and stop talking, turning their heads toward the piano. The room seemed larger, the hall quieter, and for a few moments, it felt like the music itself was the most important thing in the world. The young woman smiled slightly as she noticed the subtle reactions of the guests, how they leaned closer, how their eyes softened. This was her chance to share something she had always kept to herself, and she was beginning to see the impact of her gift. Behind her, the wedding continued, but the attention of the hall had shifted. People who were talking, laughing, or checking their phones were now looking at her with wonder. The server, once unnoticed, had become the center of attention without even trying. She was not performing for fame or applause. She was sharing something beautiful, something that came straight from her heart. The melody she played carried a quiet emotion that made people feel connected, even if they didn't know why. It was a simple tune, but it held a magic that no one in the room could ignore. As the first part of her melody ended, there was a short pause. Guests looked at each other, unsure what to do next. Some clapped softly, more out of surprise than anything else, while others simply smiled, letting the music settle in their minds. The young woman's hands rested lightly on the keys, and she took a deep breath, feeling more confident. The reaction of the guests had given her courage, and she was ready to continue. She knew that what she played next would carry the story forward, and she was eager to see how it would affect the people who had so far only seen her as a server. The energy in the room had changed completely. What had started as a simple request, almost a joke, had turned into something meaningful. The guests were no longer thinking about the wedding decorations, the food, or even themselves. They were focused on the music and the person creating it. The young woman felt a warmth in her chest, knowing that she was about to share a piece of herself that would leave a mark on everyone present. She pressed her fingers on the keys again, ready to let the music flow freely, unaware that what she was about to do would shock and amaze the entire hall. This quiet, humble server was about to become the most unforgettable part of the wedding, and her story was only just beginning. The young woman's fingers hovered over the keys, and for a moment, she closed her eyes. She could feel every note in her mind, every rhythm that had been rehearsed in the quiet of her room countless times. The small crowd around the piano leaned closer, their whispers dying down as they waited to hear what would come next. She pressed her fingers gently on the keys, starting with a soft, flowing melody. The notes spread through the room like a gentle wave, catching the attention of even those who had been busy talking or laughing just moments before. A few guests exchanged looks, surprised at the skill that seemed to come naturally to her. They had expected a simple, clumsy attempt, maybe a few random notes that might make people smile politely. But this was different. Every note was measured and full of feeling. The melody was simple enough to be approachable, but it had depth that made people stop and listen. Children paused mid-step, frozen as the music wrapped around them. Adults stopped their conversations, turned their heads, and allowed the sound to fill their senses. Some guests even leaned on their tables, resting their elbows and letting the music take over their attention. The young woman did not play fast or try to impress anyone with speed or complexity. Instead, she let each note breathe, letting the music flow naturally. Her hands moved with confidence now, gliding across the keys in a rhythm that felt effortless. Her expression was calm, but her heart raced with excitement. She had never performed in front of so many people, yet something inside her told her that this was the right place, the right moment to share her gift. Each note seemed to echo around the hall, bouncing softly off the walls and mingling with the soft laughter and chatter that still lingered at the edges. Guests began to notice details in the music they had never expected. There were small pauses that made them lean in, subtle changes in tempo that pulled them closer, and gentle crescendos that made their hearts lift slightly. The young woman's hands seemed to tell a story of their own, a story of patience, practice, and hidden talent. People whispered quietly among themselves, asking how a server could play so beautifully. Others shook their heads in disbelief, smiling in amazement. The music had transformed her from a background figure into the center of attention without her saying a single word. She continued, letting her confidence grow with each measure. The crowd around the piano started to swell as more people moved closer, curious to see the young woman who had captivated everyone with a few notes. Even guests who had been distracted by phones or conversations set them aside, unable to resist the pull of the music. Some smiled, some closed their eyes, and others leaned forward slightly, feeling the rhythm resonate through the room. The young woman felt the energy from the audience without needing to see it. She could sense their amazement and curiosity, and it encouraged her to continue. The melody began to shift subtly, adding layers that carried emotion and depth. The music was no longer just pleasant. It had started to evoke feelings. Some guests felt a gentle sadness, as if remembering a distant memory. Others felt joy bubbling up inside them, smiles widening as the music touched their hearts. The young woman had never intended to move anyone this much, but the natural beauty of the piano and her connection to it made it happen. The hall, once filled with casual chatter and laughter, was now wrapped in a quiet reverence that surprised everyone. One guest nudged another quietly, whispering, "Did you know she could do this?" The other shook their head, equally astonished. The young woman's presence had always been quiet and humble, never drawing attention. She had always been polite and careful, ensuring everyone had what they needed, never asking for recognition. And yet now, without a single word, she had captured the hearts of the people around her. The contrast between her ordinary role as a server and her extraordinary talent made the moment even more powerful. As the melody continued, her fingers moved faster in some parts, gently teasing the higher notes, then returning to a soft, steady rhythm. Guests noticed the shift and leaned in even closer, some gripping the edges of tables as the music took over. It was as if the room had transformed, the hum of conversations fading entirely, replaced by the rich sound of piano notes flowing freely. The children watched silently, eyes wide, while older guests exchanged looks of wonder. Some whispered words like beautiful and incredible, unable to contain their amazement. The young woman's heart swelled with a mixture of nerves and joy. She had never played for an audience like this, yet the music felt like it belonged in this moment. She remembered the long hours spent practicing in empty rooms, the quiet mornings when she had played just to feel the keys beneath her fingers. None of it had prepared her for the reaction she was receiving now, and yet it all made sense. Music, she realized, was meant to be shared, and this was her chance to do so in the most unexpected of places. The melody began to grow more expressive, each note carrying emotion and intention. Guests could feel it in their chests, a vibration that resonated deep inside them. Some were moved to tears, others to laughter, and a few simply sat in stunned silence. The young woman's skill was undeniable, but it was more than that. There was a story in her playing, a story of humility, hidden talent, and the beauty of unexpected moments. People began to understand that this was not just a server trying to play. This was someone sharing a piece of herself with everyone present. As she played, she noticed small gestures of appreciation. Some guests leaned forward, eyes bright and attentive. Others whispered compliments to each other, amazed at her talent. Even the children seemed captivated, standing still as the music filled the room. The young woman did not pause or look around. She simply let the music guide her, her fingers moving naturally over the keys, creating a melody that was at once simple and profound. Every note carried meaning, and the audience responded in kind. The hall, once alive with chatter and movement, had now become a space of shared experience. Guests were no longer separate individuals. They were united in their attention and appreciation of the music. The young woman's playing had created a moment of connection that was powerful and rare. People were drawn together by the beauty they were witnessing, and the quiet admiration in the room spoke volumes about the effect she was having. As the melody approached its next phase, it grew slightly louder, more confident. Her fingers moved with precision and grace, each note ringing clearly in the air. Guests leaned closer still, some holding their breath, sensing that something remarkable was unfolding. The young woman was aware of the attention, but she did not let it distract her. She focused entirely on the music, letting it flow through her and into the hall, allowing everyone present to experience the magic. By now, the whispers and laughter that had filled the room before were completely gone. All eyes were on the young woman and the piano. The music carried a sense of anticipation, building slowly but surely. Guests felt as though they were witnessing a moment that would stay with them forever. The young woman's humble demeanor and the unexpected display of skill created a contrast that made the performance even more compelling. People were beginning to understand that they were witnessing something rare, a hidden talent revealed at the perfect moment. The young woman continued to play, feeling a growing sense of freedom and joy. She no longer felt nervous. Instead, she felt connected to the audience in a way she had never experienced before. Every note seemed to communicate something beyond words, something that resonated deeply with each person listening. The music was no longer just sound. It was emotion, storytelling, and beauty all combined. The guests could feel it in their hearts, and the hall was alive with silent admiration and awe. As the melody flowed, some guests quietly began to clap along with the rhythm, adding a soft accompaniment without disturbing the music. Others smiled at each other, sharing the wonder they were experiencing. The young woman noticed these small gestures but kept her focus on the piano, allowing the music to continue naturally. She was in her element now, completely absorbed in the experience, and the audience was equally absorbed in her playing. The young woman's performance continued, building slowly in complexity while remaining graceful and approachable. Guests felt the emotion in each note, the careful attention she gave to every phrase, and the quiet power of her talent. The hall seemed to hold its breath, the audience captivated by the unfolding story that was told entirely through music. What had started as a playful request had become a moment of genuine beauty, connecting everyone present in a shared experience that they would remember for a long time. The young woman's fingers moved with a quiet grace, each note carefully placed, weaving a melody that felt alive and full of emotion. The hall had fallen completely silent except for the piano. Guests were no longer thinking about their conversations, the food, or even the celebration itself. All their attention had turned to the young woman and the music that seemed to flow from her very soul. The energy in the room had changed. It was no longer just a wedding reception, but a shared experience, a moment that seemed suspended in time. As she continued, the music began to take on a more expressive quality. She added subtle shifts in tempo, gentle pauses that created a sense of anticipation, and soft dynamics that made the melody rise and fall like the gentle waves of a calm sea. Guests noticed the care she took with each note, the way she seemed to communicate without words, telling a story that touched their hearts. The children, who had been running around earlier, now sat quietly on the edges of tables, mesmerized by the sound. Some of the older guests had closed their eyes, letting the music wash over them and feeling emotions they could not explain. The young woman's hands moved faster at times, yet every movement was precise, every note intentional. She was no longer playing simple melodies. She was weaving a tapestry of sound that carried emotion, nuance, and depth. Guests whispered to each other softly, unable to hide their astonishment. "Did you see how she moves?" one asked. "I never expected someone so quiet could play like this," another replied. The contrast between her humble role as a server and the brilliance of her performance made the moment even more remarkable. People were realizing that talent often hides in the most unexpected places. She paused briefly, her hands resting lightly on the keys, and the room seemed to hold its breath. Guests exchanged glances, sensing that something even more extraordinary was about to unfold. The pause was brief, but it allowed the audience to reflect on what they had already heard. Some were wiping away tears, Others had their mouths slightly open in disbelief. The young woman smiled faintly to herself, feeling a surge of confidence. She had never intended to perform for anyone outside of practice rooms. Yet the warmth and attention from the crowd encouraged her to continue. When she pressed the keys again, the melody deepened. It became more complex, yet it never lost its clarity. The notes danced in the air, wrapping around the guests like a gentle embrace. The young woman had a natural ability to feel the music and adjust it to the emotions in the room. Guests were noticing these subtleties, leaning closer, eyes wide with wonder. Some were quietly humming along, captivated by the melody. The young woman was fully absorbed in her performance, her heart racing but steady, her mind focused entirely on the music and the effect it was having. The audience was beginning to react in subtle ways. Some clutched the edges of tables as if to steady themselves against the emotions the music was stirring. Others were leaning back, letting their heads tilt slightly as they absorbed every note. Children were silent, their usual energy replaced by fascination. Guests who had been skeptical at first were now fully immersed, recognizing that they were witnessing something rare and extraordinary. The young woman's quiet presence, combined with her surprising talent, had transformed the room into a space where everyone was connected through the music. The melody began to build, gently growing in strength and confidence. The young woman allowed her emotions to guide her fingers, letting the music express feelings that words could not capture. Guests noticed the subtle crescendos, the way certain notes lingered just long enough to create a sense of longing or anticipation. Some whispered softly to each other, trying to describe what they were experiencing, while others simply sat quietly, fully absorbed. The young woman had no idea how many people were affected, but she felt the energy from the room, and it encouraged her to continue. As the melody progressed, she began to add small flourishes, delicate runs that added sparkle without overwhelming the music. Guests leaned in, noticing the skill and care in every movement. The performance was no longer just a simple piano piece. It was a display of artistry, a story told entirely through sound. The young woman's confidence grew with each measure, her initial nervousness replaced by a sense of purpose. She had never played in front of so many people, but now she felt as if she had always been meant to share her music in moments like this. Some guests began to murmur quietly among themselves, sharing their astonishment. "I can't believe she's a server," one whispered. "Her fingers, they move like magic," said another. The young woman was unaware of the comments, fully focused on the music, yet she felt the attention in the room. It was not a pressure but a gentle encouragement, like a silent agreement between her and the audience. She continued to play, letting her emotions guide each note, weaving a melody that seemed to resonate with everyone present. The children, who had been watching with wide eyes, were completely captivated. They no longer fidgeted or ran around. They were still, letting the music wash over them. Some whispered to each other in awe, trying to describe what they were feeling. The adults were equally moved. Some had tears forming, others smiled broadly, and a few simply sat in stunned silence. The young woman's music had created a shared experience that transcended age and background, uniting everyone in a moment of pure emotion. As she played, her hands glided effortlessly across the keys, moving from gentle, soft notes to more dramatic passages. The audience could feel the intensity, the subtle rise and fall of the melody, and the thoughtfulness in every chord. Guests began to lean closer, not wanting to miss a single sound. Some were whispering to their neighbors, expressing disbelief and admiration. The young woman was unaware of the whispers. She was fully absorbed in the music, feeling a connection to everyone around her that was both exhilarating and humbling. The melody shifted once more, becoming even more expressive. The young woman's hands moved faster at times, yet each note was intentional and full of feeling. Guests were completely captivated, some leaning on tables for support, others closing their eyes to better absorb the music. The room seemed to pulse with the sound of the piano, as if the walls themselves were listening. The young woman could feel the attention and admiration in the air, and it gave her the courage to continue, pushing her performance to new heights. The music began to tell a story, each note carrying emotion, each pause adding depth. Guests felt the narrative unfolding without words, experiencing the highs and lows, the joy and the longing. Some whispered to each other, trying to describe the emotions the music evoked. Others simply sat quietly, letting the sound wash over them. The young woman's skill was evident, but it was more than that. It was the honesty and emotion behind each note that captured the audience. They were witnessing not just a performance, but a heartfelt expression of someone's talent and soul. The melody grew stronger, yet retained a sense of intimacy. Guests felt as if they were sharing a private moment with the young woman, even in the crowded hall. The music connected them, creating a sense of unity and admiration that was palpable. Children remained still, their eyes wide with wonder, while adults exchanged looks of awe and amazement. The young woman had transformed the room with her music, taking something ordinary, a server at a wedding, and turning it into an unforgettable experience. As the performance continued, the young woman's confidence grew. She allowed herself to explore the keys fully, adding subtle variations and embellishments that made the melody her own. Guests noticed the depth and skill in her playing, leaning closer and listening intently. The energy in the hall was electric yet gentle, a shared recognition of beauty and talent that no one had expected. The young woman felt a sense of fulfillment she had never known, realizing that she had touched people in a way that words could never achieve. The hall, once lively with chatter and laughter, had become a place of quiet awe and admiration. Guests were captivated, completely absorbed in the young woman's performance. Her music created a bond between everyone present, a shared experience that would be remembered long after the wedding ended. The young woman's humble presence, combined with her extraordinary talent, had transformed an ordinary moment into something magical and unforgettable. The story of her hidden talent had begun to unfold, leaving the audience amazed and eager to see what would come next. The young woman's fingers danced across the piano keys, creating a melody that was soft, flowing, and full of life. The notes seemed to fill the hall, moving gently from one corner to the next, reaching every person present. Guests were completely absorbed, their eyes fixed on the piano and the woman who played it. Some leaned forward on tables, others closed their eyes to fully feel the music, and even the children who had been playful earlier were now quietly watching, fascinated. The atmosphere had changed completely. What had been a lively wedding reception was now transformed into a space where everyone felt a shared sense of awe. As she continued, the music grew more expressive. The young woman's fingers moved with confidence and precision, creating subtle variations in the melody that made it even more captivating. Guests could feel the emotion behind each note, sensing the story she was telling without words. Some were moved to tears, others smiled, and a few were simply frozen, caught in the power of the music. Every person in the hall felt a connection, a quiet understanding that they were witnessing something extraordinary. The young woman had started her performance with gentle, simple notes, easing into the music carefully. But now, as her confidence grew, she added layers and complexity, allowing the melody to rise and fall naturally. Guests noticed the skill in her hands, the way her fingers moved smoothly and confidently across the keys. The music was beautiful, yes, but it was also full of feeling, a combination that made it impossible to look away or think of anything else. Even the background chatter and clinking of glasses had disappeared. The hall was silent, focused entirely on the piano. The audience was not only watching but experiencing the music. Some guests had their eyes closed, letting the melody flow into their hearts, feeling the gentle rhythm and subtle shifts in tempo. Others exchanged glances, silently communicating their astonishment and admiration. The young woman had transformed from a quiet server into the center of attention, yet she remained humble, focused entirely on the music. It was clear to everyone that she was not performing for recognition or praise. She was sharing something personal, something that came from deep within her. As the melody progressed, the music began to tell a story. Each note carried emotion, each pause added depth, and every chord seemed to speak directly to the hearts of the listeners. Guests felt the music in their chests, sensing the intention and care behind each phrase. Some whispered to each other softly, marveling at the talent they had just discovered. Others simply sat silently, overwhelmed by the beauty of what they were hearing. Even the children, usually full of energy and noise, were still, completely captivated by the performance. The young woman allowed herself to feel the music fully, letting it guide her hands and fingers. She moved from gentle, soft notes to stronger, more confident chords, creating a balance that was both powerful and graceful. Guests leaned in, noticing every subtle variation, every delicate change in tempo. They were realizing that this was no ordinary performance. It was an expression of passion and dedication, a moment that would stay with them long after the wedding ended. The young woman had taken an ordinary request and turned it into something unforgettable. Her melody began to rise, filling the hall with a sense of anticipation and excitement. Guests felt the energy shift as the music grew, the gentle flow giving way to a more dynamic rhythm. Some were tapping their fingers lightly on the tables. Others simply listened, completely absorbed. The young woman's playing was natural and effortless, yet it was clear that every note had been carefully considered. Her hands moved with confidence and grace, creating a performance that was both technically impressive and emotionally moving. As the audience listened, they began to notice the depth and emotion in the music. The young woman's performance was not just about playing the piano. It was about telling a story, connecting with the listeners, and sharing a piece of herself. Some guests were visibly moved, tears forming in their eyes as they felt the music resonate with their own emotions. Others smiled warmly, feeling a sense of joy and admiration. The children, usually restless and fidgety, sat quietly, captivated by the beauty and skill before them. The melody continued, flowing seamlessly from one section to the next. The young woman added subtle flourishes, delicate runs that added sparkle without overwhelming the piece. Guests leaned closer, listening intently, noticing the precision and care in every movement. The music created a sense of intimacy, drawing the audience into a shared experience that felt personal and profound. The young woman's confidence had grown, and her connection to the audience was evident. Every note she played carried emotion, every pause allowed the music to breathe, and every chord told a story. The room was completely silent except for the piano. Guests were mesmerized, unable to look away or speak. Some were wiping away tears, others had their mouths slightly open in disbelief, and a few simply sat quietly, letting the music wash over them. The young woman's performance had captured the hearts of everyone present, transforming a simple wedding reception into a moment of shared beauty and wonder. She had become more than just a server. She was an artist, a storyteller, and a source of inspiration. As the music reached its next phase, the young woman allowed herself to play with more freedom. She explored the keys fully, adding small variations and embellishments that made the melody uniquely hers. Guests noticed the skill and emotion in every note, leaning closer to hear each sound clearly. The children remained still, eyes wide with amazement, while adults exchanged looks of wonder and admiration. The young woman had turned a playful request into an unforgettable experience, and the hall was completely captivated by her talent. The melody shifted again, becoming more expressive and dynamic. The young woman's hands moved with confidence, creating a rhythm that was both powerful and gentle. Guests felt the music in their hearts, sensing the emotion and care behind every note. Some whispered quietly to each other, marveling at the talent before them, while others simply sat in awe, completely absorbed. The young woman's performance was no longer just a musical display. It was a connection, a shared moment that united everyone in the hall through beauty and emotion. As she continued, the music grew stronger and more expressive. The young woman allowed herself to feel every note, letting the melody guide her hands. Guests noticed the care and intention behind every chord, every pause, and every flourish. The children watched in silence, their usual energy replaced by fascination. Adults leaned forward, listening intently, and some even closed their eyes to fully absorb the sound. The young woman's humble presence and extraordinary talent had transformed the room, creating a moment that no one would forget. The young woman's playing became more fluid, each note blending seamlessly into the next. The audience was captivated, their attention completely focused on the piano and the woman who played it. Some guests were quietly clapping along with the rhythm, while others simply sat in awe. The music created a sense of unity and shared experience, connecting everyone in the hall through the beauty of sound. The young woman had taken an ordinary moment and turned it into something magical, leaving a lasting impression on everyone present. As the melody approached its next section, it grew even more expressive, full of emotion and subtle complexity. Guests were leaning closer, listening intently, noticing every delicate movement and variation. The young woman's performance had become a story told entirely through music, a story that resonated with each person differently but united them all in admiration. The children remained quiet, completely absorbed, and the adults were moved by the depth and beauty of what they were witnessing. The young woman had turned a simple request into a transformative experience, one that would stay with the audience for years to come. The young woman continued to play, allowing her emotions to guide her fingers. The music rose and fell naturally, creating a rhythm that was both powerful and gentle. Guests could feel the energy and intention behind every note, sensing the care and thoughtfulness in each phrase. The hall was silent except for the piano, and the audience was fully captivated. The young woman had become the heart of the room, sharing a piece of herself through the beauty of her music. As the performance progressed, the melody became more complex and expressive. The young woman added subtle embellishments and variations, creating a unique and personal interpretation of the piece. Guests noticed the skill and emotion in her playing, leaning closer to fully experience the sound. Children were still, their eyes wide with wonder, and adults exchanged looks of amazement and admiration. The young woman had transformed a simple wedding request into an unforgettable performance, leaving everyone in the hall completely captivated and inspired. The young woman's fingers continued to glide across the piano keys, each movement precise and full of emotion. The hall was completely absorbed in the sound, and a sense of wonder filled the room. Every guest, from the youngest child to the oldest adult, was watching intently, captivated by the unexpected beauty that had emerged from someone they had thought of as just a server. The music seemed to reach into every corner of the hall, connecting everyone present in a way that words could not. Her hands moved faster now, dancing across the keys with skill and grace. Each note was carefully placed, telling a story that was both personal and universal. Guests could feel the rhythm in their chests, the melody echoing their own emotions. Some were moved to tears, others smiled with admiration, and a few simply sat in stunned silence. The young woman's presence, quiet and humble, had been transformed into something extraordinary, a reminder that talent often hides in the most unexpected places. The melody began to grow more complex, each section flowing naturally into the next. The young woman's confidence had increased with each measure, and she allowed herself to explore the full range of the piano. The audience leaned in closer, noticing every subtle change in tempo, every delicate embellishment, and every shift in volume. The music carried layers of emotion, from joy to longing, from excitement to quiet reflection. Guests were no longer simply listening. They were experiencing, feeling the story that was unfolding in the sound. Children who had been running and playing earlier were now completely still, their eyes wide and focused. They whispered to each other softly, sharing their amazement. Adults exchanged glances, trying to communicate their astonishment without words. The young woman had created a moment that united everyone in the hall, a shared experience that was rare and beautiful. The energy in the room was palpable, and it seemed as if time itself had slowed down, allowing the music to fill every space and heart. As she played, her hands moved with fluidity and elegance, creating a melody that was both intricate and approachable. Guests were captivated, noticing the skill and emotion behind each note. The young woman's performance was no longer just a musical display. It had become a story, a journey, and a connection that resonated deeply with everyone present. The audience felt her passion, her dedication, and her quiet strength, and it left a lasting impression on each person. The young woman began to introduce small variations into the melody, subtle flourishes that added depth and personality to the performance. Guests noticed these changes, leaning forward and listening intently. Some whispered in amazement, trying to describe the beauty they were witnessing. Others simply closed their eyes, allowing the music to wash over them and feeling the emotions it stirred. The young woman had turned a simple request into an unforgettable experience, and the room was completely captivated. The melody reached a gentle climax, a moment where the music seemed to fill the entire hall with its energy. The young woman's hands moved quickly, yet every note was precise and intentional. Guests felt the music in their hearts, the rhythm resonating with their own emotions. Some had tears forming in their eyes, others smiled with admiration, and a few simply sat in awe, unable to find words to describe what they were feeling. The young woman's quiet demeanor and extraordinary talent had transformed the space, creating a moment that would be remembered long after the wedding ended. As the music softened, the young woman allowed herself a brief pause, letting the notes linger in the air. The audience held its breath, caught in the beauty and emotion of the moment. The pause gave them time to reflect on what they had just experienced, the silence almost as powerful as the music itself. Guests exchanged glances, some whispering words of admiration, others simply taking in the experience in quiet awe. The young woman smiled faintly, feeling the connection between herself and the audience, the unspoken understanding that they were sharing something special. She continued the melody, now adding gentle, flowing passages that contrasted with the earlier intensity. Guests noticed the change, leaning in closer and listening intently. The music had a calming effect, wrapping around the audience like a warm embrace. Children remained still, completely captivated, and adults felt a sense of peace and admiration. The young woman had created a performance that was both powerful and intimate, leaving everyone in the hall deeply moved. As the melody progressed, she allowed herself to explore the upper range of the piano, creating notes that sparkled and danced in the air. The audience leaned forward, mesmerized by the skill and emotion in her playing. Some whispered to each other, sharing their astonishment and admiration. Others simply sat quietly, absorbing the beauty and depth of the performance. The young woman's talent, hidden for so long, had now been revealed in the most extraordinary way, and it left a lasting impression on everyone present. The music grew more dynamic, with shifts in tempo and volume that added excitement and drama. Guests could feel the energy building, their attention completely captured. The young woman's hands moved with confidence and precision, each note carefully placed and full of emotion. The melody told a story that resonated with the audience, creating a shared experience that was both powerful and unforgettable. Children watched with wide eyes, adults leaned forward, and the hall was alive with silent admiration. As the performance continued, the young woman allowed herself to play with more freedom, exploring the keys fully and adding personal touches that made the melody uniquely hers. Guests noticed the changes, leaning in and listening closely. Some whispered quietly, trying to describe the emotions the music evoked, while others simply closed their eyes, letting the sound wash over them. The young woman had transformed a playful request into a performance that was both moving and inspiring, leaving the audience completely captivated. The music reached its peak, a moment of intensity and beauty that held the audience spellbound. The young woman's fingers moved quickly across the keys, yet every note was deliberate and full of feeling. Guests felt the rhythm in their chests, the melody echoing their own emotions. Some were moved to tears, others smiled with admiration, and a few simply sat in stunned silence. The young woman had turned an ordinary moment into something extraordinary, creating a shared experience that would be remembered for years to come. As the melody began to wind down, the young woman played softer, slower notes that allowed the music to linger in the air. Guests felt a sense of calm and reflection, the intensity of the earlier passages giving way to gentle, soothing sounds. The children remained quiet, captivated by the final notes, and adults felt a sense of admiration and gratitude. The young woman's performance had transformed the hall, turning a simple wedding request into an unforgettable experience. The final notes echoed through the hall, fading gently and leaving a profound silence. Guests were still for a moment, absorbing what they had just witnessed. Then, slowly, the hall erupted into applause, cheers, and exclamations of amazement. People clapped enthusiastically, some standing, others calling out words of praise. The young woman smiled, humbled by the reaction, yet proud of what she had shared. Her quiet talent had now been revealed to the world, leaving a lasting impact on everyone present. The bride and groom approached her, their faces full of admiration and gratitude. They thanked her personally, expressing how amazed they were by her skill and the emotions she had stirred. Other guests came forward, eager to compliment her and learn more about her background. The young woman remained humble, responding with quiet gratitude. Yet she could feel the recognition and respect that her performance had earned. What had begun as a simple request had transformed into a moment of true beauty, leaving a mark on the hearts of everyone in the hall. The young woman's performance had not only entertained but inspired. Guests would remember the moment for years, sharing stories of the server who had surprised them all with her extraordinary talent. The music had created a sense of unity, admiration, and wonder that extended far beyond the hall. The young woman had turned an ordinary day into an unforgettable experience, leaving a lasting impression on everyone present and proving that hidden talent can emerge in the most unexpected places. The final notes of the melody lingered in the air, soft and delicate, leaving a profound silence in the hall. Guests slowly came back to themselves, blinking, exchanging amazed glances, and whispering in disbelief. The young woman remained seated at the piano for a moment, her fingers resting lightly on the keys. She could feel the attention of everyone around her, the warmth and admiration radiating through the room. Though she had expected only polite applause for trying, the reality was far beyond her imagination. Every eye in the hall was on her. Every heart seemed to beat in sync with the final echoes of the music. Then, the hall erupted into applause, cheers, and even calls for an encore. People were standing, clapping, and some were wiping away tears. The atmosphere was electric, filled with excitement and wonder. The young woman stood slowly, bowing politely, her face glowing with a mixture of pride, relief, and humility. She had shared a part of herself that had been hidden for so long, and the response was overwhelming. People came closer, wanting to offer their congratulations, their astonishment mingling with gratitude for being allowed to witness such beauty. The bride and groom approached, their faces shining with admiration. They expressed heartfelt thanks, telling her how much the music had meant to them, how it had added something extraordinary to their special day. Their words were warm and sincere, and the young woman could feel the genuine emotion behind them. Other guests followed, eager to shake her hand, compliment her, and ask questions about her background. Some wanted to know where she had learned to play so beautifully, while others simply wanted to tell her that they had never experienced anything so moving. The young woman smiled quietly, responding with polite thanks and gentle nods. She had never played for so many people at once, yet the experience had shown her the power of music to touch hearts and bring people together. She realized that her secret talent, something she had kept hidden out of shyness or humility, had the ability to inspire, amaze, and move others in ways she could not have imagined. This moment had transformed her from a background figure into a person of recognition, even if only for a few hours. As the guests continued to express their admiration, some recorded the moment on their phones, wanting to capture and share the memory. Videos and photos circulated quickly, spreading her performance beyond the walls of the hall. Social media posts began to appear almost immediately, with people sharing their amazement at the server who had stunned everyone with her talent. The young woman was still processing the attention, realizing that her quiet life and hidden abilities were now being seen by a much wider audience. The energy in the hall remained high, but there was also a sense of calm and joy. The children who had watched with wide eyes earlier were now smiling and talking quietly among themselves, sharing their impressions of the beautiful music. Adults continued to discuss the performance in hushed tones, marveling at the skill and emotion she had displayed. Even the staff who had been working quietly alongside her were impressed, expressing their surprise and admiration for someone they had always known as polite, diligent, and unassuming. The young woman returned to her duties briefly, bringing trays of desserts and drinks, but the effect of her performance lingered. Guests continued to talk about the music, sharing their amazement and recounting how unexpectedly moving it had been. She noticed smiles and nods of recognition whenever she passed by, small gestures that reinforced the impact of what she had shared. For the first time, she felt a deep sense of connection to those around her, a feeling that her music had created a bridge between herself and the people she served. Throughout the rest of the evening, the young woman continued to play, offering a few more short melodies upon request. Each time, the hall responded with the same attentive focus and admiration, showing that the magic of her first performance had not faded. Guests gathered naturally around the piano whenever she began to play, creating an informal audience that was eager to listen. The music had shifted the tone of the celebration, adding a layer of elegance, warmth, and emotion that made the wedding unforgettable. By the end of the night, the young woman was exhausted but happy. She had shared her talent, moved people in profound ways, and discovered the joy of performing for an audience that truly appreciated her skill. The reactions of the guests had been humbling and inspiring, showing her that even small gestures or hidden talents could have a powerful impact. She reflected quietly on how a simple request to play the piano had become a transformative experience, not just for the audience but for herself as well. The young woman's story spread beyond the wedding hall. Guests shared their experience with friends and family, describing the server who had captivated everyone with her music. Videos circulated online, receiving likes, shares, and comments from people amazed by her talent. The performance had gone viral in a quiet, human-centered way, touching hearts far beyond the original audience. People commented on the authenticity, the skill, and the unexpected beauty of her music, reinforcing that talent often resides in places we least expect. In the days that followed, the young woman received invitations and opportunities she had never imagined. Some people asked if she would perform at events, others suggested recording her music, and a few simply wanted to hear her play again. Yet despite the growing attention, she remained humble and grounded, grateful for the experience and for the chance to share her gift. Her quiet nature and gentle presence had not changed, but she now understood the power of music to bring joy, connection, and inspiration to those around her. Looking back on that wedding day, she realized how unexpectedly life can change in a single moment. A playful request had become a life-altering experience, revealing hidden talent, creating lasting memories, and leaving a profound impression on everyone present. Guests would remember the evening not just for the wedding itself, but for the magic that had unfolded at the piano, the beauty of a performance that had touched hearts and inspired admiration. The young woman had learned that sometimes, stepping into the light, even for a brief moment, could reveal extraordinary possibilities. The young woman continued to work at the hall, but her perspective had changed. She saw herself and her abilities differently, understanding that her music could move people, create connections, and leave a lasting impact. The experience had given her confidence and a sense of purpose, showing her that hidden talent could shine when given the right moment. Guests continued to return, eager to hear her play again, and she found herself looking forward to sharing her music, not just for recognition, but for the joy it brought to others. The story of the young woman at the wedding spread as an inspiring example of hidden talent revealed, humility meeting opportunity, and the power of music to touch hearts. It reminded people that extraordinary moments could arise from ordinary circumstances, that kindness and skill could leave lasting impressions, and that beauty often comes from those we least expect. The young woman's performance had created more than applause. It had created a memory, an experience, and a connection that would endure long after the wedding day was over. In the end, the young woman's piano performance became more than just a fleeting moment. It was a turning point, a revelation of her abilities, and an unforgettable experience for everyone who witnessed it. The applause, the admiration, and the recognition were meaningful, but the true impact lay in the joy, wonder, and inspiration she had shared with others. The wedding had been a celebration of love and union, but it had also become a celebration of talent, courage, and the extraordinary power of music to move people in ways words cannot express. Her story, quiet yet profound, would remain in the hearts of those present forever, a testament to the beauty that can emerge when hidden gifts are allowed to shine.